Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mayleaf and welcome to the first episode of our Foundations of Tea series. We've made over 300 videos on YouTube diving into the geekeries of tea, all of these masterclasses and in-depth tastings, but I thought it's been a while since we've done a video squarely aimed at people who are just dipping their toes into tea. Maybe you're a tea head who needs a refresher course. Maybe you are a tea head who wants to introduce your friends to the wonderful journey of tea, and this is the perfect video to point them to. I'm very happy to be joined by Holta.
Hi guys.
Holta is an old school friend of Celine's, and she made the cardinal mistake of saying she wouldn't mind being on a video, so we roped her in.
Immediately.
Yeah, instantly. You're here. Welcome, Holta. Thank you for joining us. Why don't you tell everyone out there, like, your tea story, what you know about tea, just, you know, the basics.
Okay. Well, not much is the answer to that. So I obviously been coming over to you guys and been given a real taste of what tea should taste like, as opposed to the tea bags. And I've got to know a little bit more about like smelling it and trying to, I think, just kind of getting a real sense of like the different tastes. But I don't understand, and I've asked you a million questions about where does this come from? Why does it taste like this? What can I have it with? So I thought this would be the perfect way to learn a bit more.
So I thought it would be great, instead of just me, talking at a camera, you represent everybody out there.
Yeah.
Everybody who's learning. So Holta is going to be asking the questions. If I'm not clear, interrupt me.
Cool.
And what we want to try to achieve by the end of this is to give you not just basic knowledge, but a really good foundational knowledge as to the differences between commodity versus sort of faux premium versus what we call pinnacle tea. And I'm pretty confident that by the end of this series, everybody who follows this will be able to hold their own against all tea heads out there and be able to discuss tea properly. Now, you can dive a lot deeper. As I said, we've got 300 videos where we go really, really deep, but this is going to be the perfect springboard for hopefully a passionate and indulgent journey into tea and a lifetime of learning. So we're splitting up these lessons. The first one is going to be just about the tea plant. The second one we're going to be doing is going to be talking about the relationship of the plant and the producer. So how the producer sort of affects the quality of the tea. The third one is going to be about brewing. So that's where you get involved, and we're going to be teaching different methods of brewing. And then we're going to be doing 1 or 2 videos based on tasting and how to sort of discern quality in tea and how you can sort of develop your own relationship and tasting notes with tea.
Sounds good.
Ready to get stuck in?
Yes.
Okay, don't forget, interrupt me because I tend to rabbit on and speak very quickly. So, tea comes from Camellia sinensis, right? Camellia, you know, this plant that has lots of camellia flowers.
Okay.
Right?
I did not know that, but cool.
So camellia is a shrub which is a native to Asia.
Right.
There are about 100 to 300 different varieties, so lots of different varieties, lots of ornamental varieties, flowering varieties. Tea also produces flowers.
Okay.
Yeah, so you get these not particularly glorious flowers, but nice little cute little white flowers. And so one of these sort of 100 to 300, depending on how you define a variety, it's one of those things, it depends on. It's very controversial.
Okay.
It reminds me of a comedy routine by Ricky Gervais where he was saying there's too many species of frog in the world because somebody just went, it's slightly smaller legged frog, right? So let's give it a new name. Anyway, so there's 100 to 300 different species. One of them is Camellia sinensis.
Okay.
Camellia sinensis is the plant that makes tea, 99.9% of tea.
Wow, okay.
So I should say that for all of the really geeky tea heads, there are lots of, there's nothing exhaustive in tea, right?
Okay,
so there's a small percentage of tea which is made not from Camellia sinensis, but we're not going to get involved in that. So Camellia sinensis is the plant, and it's worth sort of comparing it to wine. So one plant, grape, right? But then you've got lots of different varieties. Okay. And the 2 main varieties that people talk about is Camellia sinensis assamica.
Okay.
Assam.
Yeah.
Camellia sinensis. So sinensis just is another way of saying Chinese.
Right.
Okay. And tea has a long history. So supposedly about 4,500 years old in terms of using tea by humans. Obviously, the tea plant has been around for a lot longer than that. And there's about 2,100 years of documented history of tea. So we know it's very, very old. And we know this plant is very old. And its origins are in the Eastern Himalayan corridor. So basically, the birthplace of tea is around sort of Myanmar, southwest China, around the Himalayas. That's really where tea definitely started to be grown. And then it started to spread out.
When did it start to spread out, and which areas did it go into first?
This is a point of a lot of study.
Right.
But in essence, it definitely started in that area. It was probably used as a food at the beginning. So people were using it to eat and pickle it. So it stands to reason. You imagine you're walking around and you see these things and you would try to eat it. And then it moved into like a soup, being ingredient for a soup, and then became like it developed into tea, and it spread definitely into what is now known as China. So at that time it wasn't China, right? So the Chinese are very quick to say tea was invented in China. It was like, yes, technically it wasn't China at the time, but what is geographically now China, you could say.
Right.
So then it moved east.
Okay.
And interesting, as it moved east, well, as you look at the varieties that are further east, they tend to be more of the sinensis variety. So Assamica and sinensis. This is the sinensis variety. This is the Assamica variety. Okay. Now, there's some controversy as to whether or not it started off with Assamica. This is definitely an original, what we call like an heirloom natural variety. Some people think that maybe sinensis is just a domestication of this plant. It just slowly evolved and hybridized. Some people think that it may have carved off earlier and created its own sort of like, lineage in essence. But the thing about the plant is, and this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, is they think of Assamica and sinensis, but those two varieties are very easily hybridized.
Okay, right.
And so there's natural hybrids. So there's everything in between. So it's not black and white, it's a spectrum.
Right.
And because of that, you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of varieties of tea.
Why does this look more authentic than this?
Well, you tell me, what do you define as authentic?
It feels like this it's smaller, it's a different colour. This feels like the more kind of original tea. Maybe it's bigger, I don't know why.
Well, I mean, you're right in the sense that this is the original tea.
Okay, yeah.
This is the sort of the oldest tea trees are from this variety. This what in China they call it daiyezhong, which just basically means big leaf. So you can see big leaf versus small leaf.
Yeah.
And these are both young pickings. Okay,
Right,
so if you allowed this picking to grow bigger, it would be about the size of your palm, the leaf.
Okay.
Whereas this one would be about the size of sort of half your palm.
Interesting.
Okay. So basically you've got big leaf and small leaf. And if you go to China, most of the time they just talk about it in that way. Is it a big leaf or is it a small leaf variety?
Yeah.
But as I said, there's a whole sort of spectrum in between.
Right.
And yeah, it does look more sort of rugged. It looks more sort of... it looks a little bit more wild than this one. And that's why some people sort of think that this may be a domesticated version of it. So the first principle of tea making is that all tea comes, or 99.9% of tea comes from Camellia sinensis.
Right.
As I said, there are other ones that are even older and wilder, but that's for the real specialists out there. The second principle of tea making is that the type of tea, so you hear about white, green, oolong, which we're going to talk about in the second episode more, that is determined by how the tea is processed.
Okay.
So you could make black tea, white tea, oolong tea out of any of these.
Wow, okay.
It doesn't matter the variety, you can make that type of tea. Okay. Now, of course, there are some varieties that through learning and through experimentation, people have worked out that makes better oolong tea than this one, right? So there are varieties that are more suited. But technically, you can make any variety of tea out of any tea bush.
Interesting.
So it's the processing that makes the difference.
Okay.
A lot of people think there's a green tea
plant.
Yeah,
that's what I thought. Okay.
And the third principle of tea making, which is the part that fascinates me the most, is that the flavour in tea comes about a lot due to, not entirely, but a lot due to stress. So, or stress is probably a bit too broad a term, but the interaction of the plant with its environment and it trying to react, defend itself from adverse reactions, attacks, looking at, the whole terroir, and we're going to talk about terroir right now, but basically those create what's called secondary metabolites.
Okay.
So if a plant is attacked, it produces defensive chemicals. A plant can't run away, right?
Yeah.
So it uses aromatics to call in and to repel.
Interesting.
So it's like, I don't like you.
Yeah.
This is an aromatic to try and defend that.
Yeah.
Or I do want you to come and enjoy me, in the case of humans, and it produces aromatics that we like.
Wow.
So don't think of the plant as passive in this.
Yes,
right?
that's an interesting
The
one.
plant is the plant's goal is to replicate.
Okay.
Tea is doing a very good job of replicating itself, right?
And has that changed throughout the time, or has it always been the case in terms of its characteristics of like attracting and not attracting?
No, that's the evolution of plants.
Okay.
That's the evolution of plants,
Yeah.
and probably the aromatic that's learned behavior from insects. Insects have the most amount of aromas, bizarrely.
Yeah,
you wouldn't think that, but yeah, it's learned behavior over millennia.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So let's quickly talk about terroir. You've heard about terroir before. Okay. Wine terroir. You never heard about this? No. Okay. So terroir is sort of like a catch-all phrase that basically describes the area that a plant grows in.
Terrain.
Terrain is more the geographic, right? And terroir encompasses everything. So terroir will encompass constant things like longitude, latitude.
Right. Okay.
Like aspect, like which side of the mountain a field is on.
Yeah.
That's going to get different sunlight at different time. It relates to like the soil, the quality of the soil. But it's also changing. So, for example, if the surrounding environment, the plants change, the ecosystem changes, the terroir is going to change. Throughout the year, like microclimate, the changes in some years are good, some years are bad. All of these things contribute to terroir. Terroir is like a catch-all to say your environment, right?
Okay.
And you can include culture in that, interestingly. Some people say, the indigenous tribes in that area, the way that they treat the tea leaf, that's part of the terroir.
Okay.
It's sort of like, it's something that is about the geographic provenance of this tea, right?
Okay.
And so just like wine and just like coffee and just like cocoa, tea is dependent on terroir. All of these factors, from very broad to very minute, have an impact on tea because of the fact that, as I said, most of the flavor is not just the innate genetics of the plant, it's how the plant reacts to the environment. So you take the same plant and you take a cutting of it, so it's supposedly the same genetics, and you put it in a different place, it's going to have a different flavor profile.
That makes sense.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the different factors in the tea plant that are required to create flavor, because that's what we care about the most is flavor and effect, but we'll talk about effect a little bit later. So obviously the genetics of the plant makes a difference, okay? And the genetics and the terroir go hand in hand. So if you've got heirloom varieties, and what I mean by that is those genetics are natural, indigenous to that terroir. Yeah. There is a tendency, and there's, again, not exhaustive, but there is a tendency that it produces higher quality tea.
Okay. But what do you mean by higher quality?
Well, that's going to be something that, first of all, is personal, right? But I guess there is consensus that sort of builds. So genetics plays its part. But let's move on to other things that maybe we can control or we can sort of adapt to. And one of them is speed. So speed of growth affects flavor. And one of the mistakes that a lot of early foreign, so outside of China, mostly British in India, tea experimenters and producers made was that they tried to give the plant too much of a perfect location for it. So very fertile soil, exactly what the plant needs. And then the problem is that the plant grows very quickly. And if the plant grows quickly, and it's easy for the plant, it doesn't develop those secondary metabolites that we were talking about, those compounds as it reacts to the environment. It's not undergoing any stress. And also it grows too quickly, and therefore the leaf doesn't really have a chance to build up enough intensity and richness of flavor.
Okay.
So speed of growth is an important factor. We ideally are looking for slow growing plants.
Is it the slower the better, or does it vary?
slower the better within reason. You don't want to get to the point where it's just like suffering and it can't grow. You know what I mean? It needs to be able to have what it needs, but not too much of what it needs.
Yeah.
And I liked the comparison with most of things in tea with people, right? It's the same thing. You want to develop character, you've got to have some hardship. Not too much,
yes, exactly.
but you've got to have some.
Yeah.
And so the terrain, like very steep slopes, soil which is a bit rocky, tends to produce very high quality tea.
Why the rock? For the minerals?
So when it rains, you get mineral leaching, but also the plant doesn't have this perfect soft peaty soil to just sort of, grow too quickly. It's sort of scrambling and holding on to the side of the mountain. Right? Those sort of scraggly sort of plants, for tea lovers out there, those look beautiful plants, right? Maybe some people out there sort of see these rolling hills of tea plantations and think, wow, that's really high quality tea. Generally, that's lower quality tea because it's too easy, right?
The plant has to work for it.
The plant has to work for it, exactly. So slower growing, rocky environments. Also, the time of year that you pick. So one of the big differences between coffee and tea or wine and tea is that coffee and wine generally have one harvest a year. Right. When the grape is ready, it's picked depending upon what you're looking for in the grape. Whereas the tea plant just keeps on flushing. It keeps on producing tea leaves. And therefore, the same plant over a year will produce very varied different qualities of tea.
Wow.
Right?
How often are they picked?
That depends upon the producer. Some producers, commodity tea, they'll pick it all year round, right? Whereas some producers, they want to protect the plant, so they'll pick only once or twice a year, and then they'll leave the plant and they'll cut it back and prune it. So there's all these sort of methods that they use. But you will have heard probably of spring-picked tea.
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, most people most of the sellers out there will say, oh, this is spring-picked, right? And that always sort of denotes higher quality. Or they'll say first flush.
Oh, okay.
Right? First flush meaning the first season of picking of the year. Right? And the reason why that is considered higher quality is because the plant has gone through this winter dormancy period, right? Where it's basically not growing, but the roots are just absorbing nutrients slowly. And then the first flushes of the year, those leaves are very rich in nutrients, but also of aromatics, right? And so picking the plant at that time of year tends to produce higher quality. Now, again, you can move into the complexity. Oftentimes the first actual plucks can be quite light, and some people like that, whereas second flushes, or part of the first flush, but second pickings, they can maybe have a bit more character. So, again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but generally earlier spring picked teas tend to be high quality, and then summer you get sort of a reduction in quality because you're getting a lot of warmth and and the plant is just sort of growing very quickly, and then autumn comes around and you get a drop in temperature and you can get very high quality teas again in sort of October time. So you like February, March, April, May, those months, and then sort of September, October, November. Right? But generally spring picked is the safest bet. So, and that's all related again to speed. Also altitude. You may hear sellers talk about high altitude teas, or this is from a higher mountain. And there are a few reasons why that can produce higher quality tea, but one of the main reasons is it's cold up there.
Oh, okay.
Right.
But that's interesting. If it's cold, surely if it's too cold, then the tea wouldn't like that too much.
That's the point. You don't want the plant to like it too much.
So high altitude is not good tea.
No, high altitude is good tea because it's colder. And therefore the plant grows more slowly. And therefore the leaves are richer in flavour. Right.
But if it's too cold.
Again, if you have snow and frost, then that can damage the taste. So with everything in tea, and we'll talk about that when we talk about producers, the weather is so dependent. And every year you're going to get variations. And that's why, I have a job, because every year I have to curate a new selection of tea. Because if I just sort of bought from the same fields, I wouldn't be, doing service to the clients. Because there's always going to be differences. Some years you get really, really cold. The worst is when you get this sort of warmth and they start to flush and then suddenly it snows, right? That can really decimate a lot of tea production. Or if it suddenly has a really rainy season when they're picking, that can really mess up the tea as well. But that's all related to speed. And therefore, one of the things that you've got to try to avoid is a field which is overly fertilized. Because again, if you put a lot of fertilizer in the soil, the plant's going to grow very quickly. And so this is the difference between yield and quality, right? So commodity tea producers, they care about yield. They want tons and tons and tons of tea. So they're going to obviously give the plant everything it needs, lots of fertilizer, everything, right? And that's going to produce pretty bland tasting tea, but you know, a lot of it. Okay, so that leads us to another factor, which is the soil. Okay, you do want soil with rocks, ideally, because again, of the mineral leaching when it rains, and you want the soil definitely has a big effect on the character of the tea.
Right.
And different provinces will have different mineral richness.
Okay.
You know, so there'll be one, maybe I'm not an expert, one that's higher in manganese, one that's higher in iron, and that produces different flavored tea.
Okay. Does it make it sweeter? Like in what way does it normally have like a pattern in terms of the way it changes it?
Certainly different areas have a certain quality.
Okay.
For example, one of the most famous areas is a mountain called Wuyi Mountain. Wuyi Mountain is in Fujian province, and it's one of the historic mountains. And the tea that it's famous for is called rock oolong. And the reason for that is because it's very rocky, right? And the taste of that tea needs to be experienced. Maybe we'll pull it out for one of the future sessions. But it's very mineral is sort of a controversial word because a lot of taste scientists say you can't taste mineral, but you can get a sense of a sort of texture of rockiness.
Okay.
You know, sometimes if you drink mineral water, if you feel it has a sort of crunchy almost sort of texture to it, and it has a very long lasting finish as well. So yeah, you get different sort of characteristics. I'm not sure about the science of if it's the iron that does X, Y, Z, but yeah. So that's very important. I should also say the age of the tea tree makes a big difference. So what a lot of people don't realize is younger tea trees or shrubs at that point grow very fast, but they again produce lower quality tea. So as the tea grows older, it doesn't need to compete, right? And therefore it can grow slower. And also, if it's older, it has very long, deep roots. And therefore, it probably can access areas of soil that younger tea trees can't. And therefore older tea trees, for a wealth of other reasons which we'll get into, produce very high quality tea.
Very interesting.
And we're talking about, like, you know, this tea that we're going to drink now is what I think it's about 300 years old, the tea trees. So, you know, when we're talking about age of tea trees in China, they get very, very old, up to like the oldest I think is supposedly around 2,500 years old, 2,700 years old. So again, you want to avoid tea plantations that don't have diversity in it. So those monocultures, those rolling fields, you want to avoid because that diversity flavors the soil, right? So if you get fruit trees and you get all these other plants, they're all dropping and causing the soil to develop other flavors.
Okay,
right?
but does that then maybe that doesn't mix well with tea?
No, it's the opposite. Complexity is always what you're searching for in tea. Okay, so what you're looking for is soil which is being fed with a lot of complex flavors from plants, from animals, from insects, and therefore you want it to be as diverse and natural an ecosystem as you possibly can.
Like London, basically.
London tea, exactly. Also, you know, when you have a lot of diversity, so you'll get these big fruit trees. They help to recycle the nutrients. So, like when it rains, nutrients go down in the soil, and if you only have like a rolling fields of small shrubs, they can't capture that, bring it back up to the leaf, and then so the soil becomes depleted. Right, before we go on to the next part of this, I think we should do some tasting because I'm getting quite thirsty. So, what we have here are these two teas. Okay, so. This one here, this Assamica, let me just pull it out here, this is the one that's dry, and you can see this is the cake of this. So this is a pu'er tea. We're going to be talking about tea types later on, but essentially this is a sun-dried green tea. Right? And then we're going to be taste testing that against this sinensis variety, so the small leaf variety, and that one is this one here, which is Anji Bai Cha, we call it Jade Arrow.
Right.
And that's from Eastern China.
Okay.
So Western, Eastern.
Right.
Again, you're talking about the variety changes.
Yes.
Tends to go small leaf as it heads north and east.
Okay.
Right. So we're going to brew it very simply in these flute brewers because it's just easier that way. Before we start to do your masterclass in brewing, and I just want you to sort of. I know this is a sort of diving into tasting. You don't have to worry about getting tasting notes, really, but more about trying to figure out. Yes, go on, do it. More about trying. I'm waiting for some miraculous tasting notes to come out.
It's not going to happen.
But yeah, more about just understanding the difference between both green teas. Okay, everyone out there is going to be saying, well, that's a pu'er tea and it's slightly different production, but essentially they're both green teas.
Okay.
One's sun-dried, one's not sun-dried.
Okay.
But the main difference is the variety. The main difference is small leaf,
Yeah.
big leaf.
Okay.
Yeah?
What are green tea, I know that it's great to keep, it's like the coffee equivalent of keeping you awake and stuff like that. What else does it do, green tea?
It's interesting you say that because a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think
Okay.
of green tea as a very low caffeine drink. Now, it is low compared to coffee, but it's one of the highest in tea. Are you talking about the health benefits of the tea?
Yeah.
They're myriad. And I think one of the things, and we can do a whole lesson on health benefits, you can add one on if you're a sucker for punishment. But basically, one of the things about the health benefits of tea is we know for certain that tea has so many health benefits, from cardiovascular health, which has a lot of proven benefits, to things like energy, performance, to anti-inflammatory, all of these things. The problem is that we don't really know the mechanism, or it's not been proven the mechanism. We know that drinking tea, if you look at metadata studies, has a lot of health benefits, but why and how is sort of theory at the moment. And one of the theories is antioxidants, which you hear about all the time. You're hearing less of it probably recently because the antioxidant theories come under a lot of sort of controversy.
Why?
Actually. Well, because there's some thought that dietary antioxidants, in other words, eating it, doesn't necessarily increase a lot of your blood concentration of them.
Okay.
That a lot of it gets excreted. So you can sort of test green tea in a test tube and go, whoa, it's so powerful in antioxidants. But when you actually test it, like when you actually sort of take blood from people, it's sort of different. And so a lot of people are thinking that there are other mechanisms at play. But, you know, the tea sellers out there just keep on banging on about antioxidants, which, you know, it does contain a lot of antioxidants that can only be beneficial. But how much of that plays its part in all the health benefits is something that's sort of unknown. And there's a whole load of other theories out there about the health benefits. But really, one of the things that I always tell people is don't get hung up on the tea type for health benefits.
Right.
Because ideally what you want to do is taste as many teas as you want, as you should, and enjoy them and indulge in them. And if you do that, you'll drink more.
But are there ones that are better for morning or lunch or like late at night? Because I wouldn't want to drink, for example, green tea at night.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. I think that everyone has different caffeine sensitivity. And most people would agree that green tea is better as an early morning or as sort of mid-afternoon pick-me-up or something, but not later at night. It depends. Some people can quite happily sip on green tea late at night. So it's sort of everyone's caffeine tolerance and sensitivity differs. But yeah, generally oolong teas are considered to be, especially darker oolong teas tend to be slightly lower in caffeine. The reason why I'm hesitating is because there are plenty of dark oolongs that have a kick. So it's sort of very hard to make generalizations. The best thing to do is always taste a tea sort of during the day, get to know how it makes you feel, and then you start to develop your own sort of opinions about when you should drink it. Okay, so here you go.
Oh, these are cute.
Right, we're going to start with Anji Bai Cha, which is a very famous Chinese green tea.
Okay. So can I
Yeah, smell the leaf by all means.
Under pressure.
No, we're not doing tasting now. We're not doing tasting notes.
I
Okay?
need a few more masterclasses before that happens.
And I don't want to dive into that because then it just sort of starts to dominate the conversation. So,
It's creamy.
so creamy, did you say? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Is there any point ever to smell the actual tea? You only smell it once it's gone into water, right?
you would smell the dry leaf when it's warm. You'd smell the wet leaf, lots and lots. And you can smell the liquor, but it doesn't give you that much. I mean, there are some teas that are very aromatic and they do give you a lot of information. One of the big no-nos is smelling cold dry leaf.
Okay.
That you don't really get much information out of that. And that's one of the things that a lot of people try to do when they buy tea.
Right. Okay. And it's interesting because like the smell changes every time you pour water, or does it remain the same?
Yeah, it's relatively constant, like as a theme, but it will always shift.
Okay.
And it's more the taste that will shift because you're extracting the tea in stages, right? So you're going to get different elements of the tea. So how would you describe it?
Definitely quite creamy. Whenever I've tried teas at your house, I just love closing my eyes and like it takes me back to a certain memory. Now it's way too much pressure for me to get to that point. But it's definitely creamy. It's interesting the change in colour as well.
Yeah.
This one, that feels obviously much paler.
So this is paler, right? Yeah. So just by looking at it, you would know that that's a more delicate tea.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the leaves sort of give that away already. So it's more delicate. It's lighter. It's brighter. You're going to taste this one soon. And yeah, I would agree with you. It's creamy. It's slightly nutty. It's got green in it. It has a sort of a green nature to it. It's got, for me, quite a nice sweet finish.
Yeah, it has a nice aftertaste as well.
Just a gentle, like sort of icing sugar sweetness, like a sweet note to it. Let me turn this off. But now, see how that compares with the Assamica. So now you're drinking a big leaf variety. So go for it.
The original one. The OG.
The OG. A lot of people out there would be cheering because a lot of people, they consider this type of tea, this pu'er tea, to be the original tea.
It's that's really nice. It feels much richer. And it has much more of a body, I think, to the other one.
Yeah, so thicker body, but also more texture to it.
Takes me on to a journey as well.
More complexity.
Yeah.
Well, that is also helped by the fact that this is 300-year-old tea trees and all the rest of it, grown in relatively semi-wild forests. So all of those factors play into it. But notice the texture as well. Notice that it might leave your mouth a little bit drier, like it has a little bit more of a physical reaction in the mouth.
It's I'm for some reason I'm tasting plum. Some fruity undertones.
It does have fruit. It does have cream. It does have flowers. So if you breathe out through the nose, you might get a bit of like magnolia or something like that. Sort of a little bit of a pale flower. But the point here is that there's a big difference in not just the taste, but the feel in the mouth. And some people, including myself, really love delicate light teas, especially sort of as your first tea in the day, right? This is quite a smack around the face as a sort of first tea, although, if you like it, go for it. But, so the delicacy of the small leaf versus the richer, more astringent, more physical nature of the large leaf. And so those are sort of the two extremes. Yeah. And then you've got all the cultivars in between.
Interesting. I'd have this for breakfast, this for lunch.
Wise. I think that would be wise. This one will definitely give you a kick as well because it has a higher caffeine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll definitely need it after my lunches.
Yeah, exactly. So feel free to keep drinking those. Okay, so that shows you the difference in variety, especially these varieties are grown in their natural terroir. This is indigenous and this is where this type of tea, this small leaf, really, tends to flourish. Before we move into the final part that I want to talk about, I'm going to start brewing this tea. This is a Japanese tea. This is a gyokuro. And it takes quite a few minutes to brew. because I'm using cold water here.
Why are you using cold water for this?
Because I want to maximize the impact so that the YouTube audience out there get to see your face when you taste this tea. So that's going to sit for it should ideally sit for 14 minutes, but we'll let it sit. Maybe we'll cut and come back.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about is other ways that we can make the plant stressed. So we talk about stress and how stress develops flavor. And let's sort of dive into that a little bit more. So let's imagine that a plant is being bitten by insects.
Okay.
Okay, so the plant is reacting, it's freaking out, it's like, oh, I'm being bitten by this insect. And it's learnt over generations, over experience, that if it produces chemicals, aromas that are, so for example, if you go on holiday and there's lots of mosquitoes, some people say put citronella oil on,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
So citronella oil tends to sort of repel. For me, it doesn't work. They love it anyway, but it tends to repel certain insects. And so the plant knows this, and it produces sort of flowery aromas or fruity aromas, things like hotrinol, which is like in honey, honeyed aromas.
How long does that last though?
Well, see, this is what's interesting. So then if the plant produces this, so one plant is being bitten by an insect and it produces it, but it doesn't just act as a repellent for the insect. And in fact, some people think it's not a repellent. What it does is it calls in a predator. So it releases a smell that calls in predators that eats these insects.
Okay.
But it also acts as a signaling system. So then all of the neighboring tea plants pick up this aroma and go, oh, plants being attacked. Our brothers or sisters are being attacked. We're going to produce this as well. So it works together. So the whole field or the whole forest starts to produce this aromatic.
How far away does it go?
It can go far. I mean, the smell of cut grass, right, is the smell that that grass is giving off. That's freaking out, saying, "I'm being injured," and it's telling all the other plants, "Get ready, you're going to be injured." Right? Okay. So it can spread. And what's interesting is that so not only does it spread, but also the plant remembers. So if it's been bitten by an insect, at some point in its life, neighboring plants have been, it stores that chemical, that aroma, and stores it deep within its cell. It bonds it with the sugar, so it's no longer smelly, but it puts it there. And then when the plant is eaten again, it's ready. Yeah. And it produces.
So it releases it much easier?
So it releases it quicker and easier.
Right.
And that's why you can start to get fields that naturally, if they've been infested enough times, that naturally have this aromatic. And then you've got the age of the tea tree as well, right? So we talked about these tea trees, and they are tea trees. Okay. So if you leave a tea plant, you often see like bushes. But if you leave a tea plant, it can grow quite tall. And so if you have tea trees, now you imagine that over 30 years, that plant maybe has only experienced drought like once. Yeah. Whereas if you have a 100-year-old tea tree, it's experienced drought, it's experienced pests, it's experienced very hot summers, it's had, again, like human beings, it's had a lot more character built up over years, okay? And so it stores all of that information, and that's why this is tasting of fruit and tasting of flowers and tasting more complex, because it's built up all of that memory of how it's had to react.
Wow, that is so interesting.
To the environment. And so that's why older tea trees tend to have more complexity. And again, you don't want to overly manage, right? So if you spray a plant with pesticides, it's not going to have the attack. Yeah. Therefore, it's not going to develop those aromas. So again, the more natural, the better. It means less yield, because if it is attacked, you're going to have problems with harvest, etc. But you are producing high quality tea. And so the big difference between commodity tea or lower quality tea and high quality tea is that the consideration is always with specialty tea quality. The consideration is always try to leave it as natural as possible. Try to have these heirloom varieties growing in natural terroir with varied ecosystem. Don't make the plant's life too easy. Don't overly fertilize the soil. Don't spray it with pesticides. And so naturally, a lot of people are worried about pesticides especially. So naturally, if you go for higher quality tea that tastes better, you're much less likely to have issues with pesticides, right? Because that's the whole point. Pesticides do not contribute to higher quality taste of tea.
Right. It's so. I mean, is that the equivalent of an organic tea not having pesticides?
Yeah. So there are organic tea fields
Okay.
out there, but in general, and this is sort of a controversial statement, but I'll say it anyway. In general, they tend to be lower quality.
Really?
And let me explain the reason why. And this is changing. So this is, depending on when you watch this may be out of date. But imagine you're a tea farmer and you've got a plantation that's in perfect terroir, that's growing the most amazing tea naturally and is selling it ridiculously eye-watering prices, right? And then you've got a so-so tea plantation lower down on the mountain.
Yeah.
Not the right aspect from the sun and, not great. Doesn't produce great tea. You know that by certifying something as organic, you can increase the price.
Ah, okay.
Right? Are you going to choose to increase the price of something that's already selling at top whack, which is probably not going to get, already it's highly sought after, it's selling out every year. You don't need to certify that as organic, right? Whereas the lower quality field, there's more of a motivation to certify that as organic and go through all of the process, because it is, a long process and costs money, etc.
Yeah.
Because you can increase the margin on that tea plant. And so there generally is the tendency, and there are lots of exceptions to this rule, so I'm not saying don't go out and seek organic tea, but overall, through all my years of tasting, organic certified tea tends to be not great.
But why would the better field not make it become organic? You said it's a longer process. Is it going to be much more expensive?
It's because those tea plants are already selling out,
right?
And they're already making a lot of money out of those tea plants, and and a lot of that tea will be sold to the domestic market. And domestic market means, in this case, China, but it might be Japan or Taiwan. And these tea lovers, this sort of inner circle of tea lovers, they don't care about your certification. All they care about is they know the forest.
Right.
They know that they know that you're not putting pesticides.
Okay.
They know that you're putting sticky tape to catch the insects.
Wow.
They know they know the quality of it.
Right.
So you certifying organic is not going to make you more money.
Okay.
Whereas that plantation down there can sell to the foreign market.
Right.
Right? And the foreign market cares about organic, and therefore let's do it. And so therefore there is a tendency that organic tends to produce, in general, lower quality tea. Okay. So what you're looking for is heirloom natural tea plantations. So plantations and forests that are managed, but basically try, the whole point is to try to keep it as natural as possible. Right. So it is organic, but it's not certified as organic. Okay. Yeah. Okay, the last thing that we want to talk about regarding stress is an example that we have here, which is gyokuro. Gyokuro is a Japanese green tea. Okay. Now, every culture, and it's one of the fascinating things about tea, is how different cultures have different preferences in tea, right? So there are some cultures that like teas to be delicate. There are some cultures that like teas to be, and certain provinces in China will have variations as well in terms of their preferences. And you can sort of see cultural definitions start to show through what they like in tea. And one of the things in Japan that they love is they like tea to be powerful. Right. They like tea to be very rich in umami. Right. So umami, that sort of savory to sweet note. And the tea contains a very interesting amino acid. It's called L-theanine. Okay. L-theanine is one of the reasons why people have been drinking tea for generations. And that's because it crosses your blood-brain barrier and affects your dopamine receptors. So it basically makes you feel good. Oh, okay. So it is the feel-good factor in tea. It's the reason why people feel happier, feel have more of a sort of happy disposition. It's why we turn the kettle on in times of stress. Right. Because we want L-theanine. Right. Again, the plant is, we are the slaves of the plant, right? The plant is saying, right, let's make ourselves reproducible for humans, right? And also, L-theanine affects your alpha brainwave activity. So it puts you in a meditative state. Really? So it puts you in a state which is alert but relaxed. Okay?
That's a bit of an oxymoron.
Well, and that's what makes it so perfect for performance, right? So you can be alert, you can work, but you're not going to be stressed, which leads to mistakes. Yes. or leads to anxiety, etc. So you can be alert but relaxed, which is why a lot of people look at tea in terms of performance.
Right.
Yeah, it means they can work harder longer, and it's the reason why monks have drunk tea, because they can meditate longer, right, and they can stay focused. So tea has this ability to focus, and one of the main reasons for that is L-theanine, which you can only find in tea, pretty much.
Right.
I mean, there are some other plants that have it, but in terms of common foodstuffs, tea is the only one.
Oh wow! Okay, I did not know that.
And
is that found across all teas?
All teas have L-theanine, but you can increase the amount of L-theanine, and L-theanine has an umami taste. It has a very sort of savory to sweet taste, very brothy taste. Okay, and the Japanese tend to really love that taste.
Right.
And so, in order to maximize that taste, what they do to stress out the plant is they shade grow the plant. So when the plant is sort of, nearing sort of a month or two before harvesting, they'll cover it.
With what?
With it depends. Sometimes plastic, sometimes other materials, natural materials, and then various levels: 70% shade, 80% shade, 90% shade. How heavy do you put the shade, and how long do you leave the shade on? And so what happens is the plant freaks out, right? Where's the sun gone?
Yes.
And so the plant naturally produces L-theanine. L-theanine is an amino acid which contributes to growth.
Right.
When the plant grows and it experiences sunlight and it produces delicate leaves, that sunlight is susceptible to UV damage. And so the theanine gets converted to another chemical called catechins, which is an antioxidant, which acts like a sunscreen. So it protects.
Wow.
Right? And so therefore, if you shade the plant is going, don't need no sunscreen.
Yes.
Keep all your L-theanine. We're not converting any of it, and let's produce as much as possible because we need to grow.
Right.
Because something is blocking us.
Oh my God.
Right?
That's amazing.
And so this is an example of how, and it sort of segues into the next episode, which is going to be about producers.
Okay.
But it's an example of how whilst the plant is still growing, you can put it under stress.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to taste this gyokuro, and this gyokuro has been shade grown for at least a month.
Right.
At like 80%, moving up to nearly 90% shade. Okay.
Right.
And I don't know how long it's been brewing here for. This is probably about ready. And you can see the color difference as well. Can you see how thick it looks?
Yes.
It's there as well, and every drop counts in this one.
Really?
Yeah.
Why does it have the green stuff coming
Because
through?
the filter's in here, and it's not gonna catch everything.
Okay.
Right. So one of the things that Japanese tea is that's different from Chinese tea and Japanese tea is that Japanese tea is steamed and then rolled quite vigorously, and so that breaks the leaf up a lot more. And
it has a little bit. It's a bit jelly-ish.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's got that gelatinous, slightly viscous quality to it. Okay, that's probably good enough. Although the people out there are going, no, you need every single drop.
Why?
It's sort of one of the things that is known for gyokuro is you got to be patient. So there's a lot of ceremonial stuff that happens. Oh, there's a leaf in there. I'll drink that one. So yeah, and that's one of them. Making sure that you get every last drop.
What is the ceremony like? What else?
Oh, there's like.
Okay.
That's a whole other one.
Whole other video for you guys.
Yeah, so like in Japan they've got their own ceremonies.
Oh, okay.
In China they do. A lot of the ceremonial stuff in China is basically more based around just trying to make the tea taste as good as possible, but then sort of made a little added flourishes to it, little sort of
nice
movements and
touches.
stuff. Whereas in Japan there tends to be, because of the relationship in Japan with Buddhism, because the Buddhist monks brought the tea seeds from China to Japan, it sort of has a different reverence to the stillness of the tea process, the tea drinking. All right, so let's taste this. So this is a cold brewed, so be prepared. It's cold.
Oh my God.
It's extreme, right?
Wow, that is so.
You pick up that quite savory, brothy.
Wow. It tastes different to the second taste.
It builds.
It's taken effect, probably.
It builds, yeah. This is one of the things about tea is oftentimes the first few cups sort of don't reveal that much, but as you lay down the minerals and the nutrients, it builds. So, do you sense the thickness, the brothiness of it? Do you pick up the savouriness of it?
Yeah, there's a savoury, but there is obviously that sweet element to it as well.
So there's a sort of cherry note.
I want some more.
Yeah. So this is super high in theanine.
Right.
So if you want a feel-good kick,
it's working.
that will rewire your brain within a few minutes.
Really?
Yeah, it's very, very quick.
Wow, that's incredible.
You can almost sort of feel it happening, you know.
Does it make you more energetic?
Theanine works synergistically with caffeine.
Okay.
So it's great because the caffeine gives you the energy.
Yeah.
But this theanine sort of shaves off and smooths out all the edginess of caffeine. So you get the energy without, you know, the anxiety.
Okay.
And also caffeine in tea is slightly different to caffeine in coffee, but we won't get into that now. But yeah, so they work together, sort of a team. So this is an example of when you stress a plant through shading it, you're changing radically the flavour.
Wow.
And so the point that I'm trying to get across here is that the tea plant is totally varied in terms of its variety, in terms of its cultivars, in terms of its terroir, in terms of where it's grown, in terms of the style of the plantation, the ecosystem, etc. But fundamentally, flavour comes from the plant's interaction with its environment. And that usually is more dominated by stress.
Okay.
You know, it's like, ooh, I'm getting too much sun. Let me change something. Or I'm getting, you know, it's a bit too cold, or I'm getting bitten, or I'm being shaded. And so always bear that in mind. There's this constant flux that's happening with the plant. And that's why every year the tea tastes different. Any questions? End of the first lesson.
Nope.
You're my protege. By the end of this, you are going to be the tea master and I can retire. That's the plan.
You'll have a few more years for that to happen, that's for sure, Don. I'm not sure how your audience will survive without your videos.
I am sure that they would be very happy to have you stand in as my replacement. Anyway, so stick your questions in the comments section below so that we can answer them. And I hope that you enjoyed this first lesson in the series. We're going to be moving on with Holta to lesson 2 soon, and that's going to be talking about the producers and the effect that the producers have, which is myriad. That's it, tea heads. Check out our other videos, taste our teas wherever you are in the world by browsing mayleaf.com, and come visit us if you're ever in London. Other than that, this is Holta.
Hello.
And I'm Don. Hello, bye-bye. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags, keep drinking the good stuff, and spread the word because nobody deserves bad tea.
Bye guys.